And I think the best place for me to talk about how voice matters is to have you imagine me in 2009, 2 days ago, 2009, at my graduation of my PhD. And I wasn't even going to go to graduation, but I got a phone call asking me to be the senior commencement speaker. And I said, but I wasn't even going to come. So there I am, standing at Lehigh University, and Vera was at my speech, so it's nice to have her here to share that memory with me. And in that speech, I talked about how when I was a student at Lehigh University, from my office on the hill, so if you've ever been to Lehigh University, it's up on a very high hill, and from the office on the hill, I could see the Bethlehem Steel, or if you're from Allentown like I am, I could see the Bethlehem Steel. Those of you who are laughing know and are from around here. So my pappy, my mother's father, worked at the Steel. And my dad and my grandfather worked at Mack Truck. And if you've ever heard the song by Billy Joel called Allentown, that is the story of my life. And I was the first kid to go to college, and I tell my first-year students at Kutztown that I carried all of my books in my bag the first day, because no one told me you didn't need to carry all your books the first day. So I carried like $500 worth of books my first day at Penn State, and I was absolutely terrified, and it poured. And all my books got soaking wet, and I had worked at Wendy's all summer to pay for these books. And so all semester I had these, I still have some of them, because they really signaled to me where I had come from and where I ended up. So on that day 7 years ago, in 2009, giving that speech, I gave a speech about how I worked my way kind of up this mountain. And so from this kind of mountaintop where I was earning this PhD, I could see where my pappy had worked for 40 years in the steel mill, and how important that was for me to really honor. You can go on there. Yep. Yep, Heidi. Yep. So how important it was for me to really honor where I came from, and I don't ever forget that. I take very seriously that I'm a first-generation college student, and there's something very deep inside of me about voice, and I think it comes from that I'm in a world where I feel a little bit weird, a little bit off, a little bit like I don't belong, and I will talk to that later. So that's kind of my story. There's more, but I think it'll get dabbled in here and there along the way during my circuitous talk. I'm sorry, I had to use it. So what I really want you to leave here today is to think about and remember that what you have to say matters. So the way I thought about presenting this is really thinking about, first of all, why don't we talk? So what are the things that we've learned over the course of our lives that maybe we silence ourselves? Then think about why what we have to say matters. Then think about some of those obstacles when we do decide to talk. And then think about what we do, right? So how do we leave here and start having our voices be heard? So if you would hit the first little arrow down there, it'll move us through. Yep. Okay. So the first question I have for you is, why might women not want to speak? Like this. Fear. Why? Okay, fear. Yeah, fear of what? Fear of being wrong, fear of rejection, judgment, being told you're not being a good girl. What did you say, Lisa? Misperception. Yes, because girls aren't supposed to talk, right? Girls are sugar and spice and everything nice, and we're supposed to be quiet, right? That's a message that so many of us learn at a young age. So if you're thinking about that question I asked you, which is why don't women speak? It is because somebody can go on a national news network and say that and be totally okay and totally fine. And again, I don't care who you vote for, but the fact that we're speaking about them and well, I do care who you vote for. I like that you laughed, but in this context, I don't care. And it's a delightful way to just remind us all that maybe we don't talk because we've been told for a really long time that good girls don't talk, and when they do, there's something else. So could you click to the next one? It's going to go through 1, 2, 3. Okay, so what are some words we hear used to describe women who speak? So what are some adjectives? Bitch. Bitchy, that's up there. Shrill, another one of my favorites. A book just came out called Shrill. I'm so excited to read it. Bossy. Nagging. Ooh, you added to my list. Controlling. What? Mouthy. Manipulative. Out of turn. Wow, man, you guys rock. You back there.
I feel sorry about saying this, but puta?
What did you say? Puta. Whore. Yeah? Yeah. Right. Slut, bitch, whore, all of these things, right? Liar. I'm noticing no one's saying assertive, confident, joyful. You know, these are not the things, if you hit the next slide, these are not the things that come to mind. And again, this is that idea of still really thinking about why don't women talk? Right? Who wants to be any of these things? Other than me, I liked being bitchy. But like, who really wants these words to be applied to them? You're what? You're assertive. Yeah. Please. Do not silence somebody in a talk about voice matters. So these words matter, right? These words matter. No one wants to be this, nobody wants to be mouthy. That was a really good one. I got called that a lot when I was a teenage girl. But we can see why, in our group, we talked about that, like a lot of that kind of self-silencing, that I'm not going to make the argument to you today that there's like some giant patriarchal like committee that has made it its goal to keep you all quiet, but that really probably we're doing it to ourselves. Because over a course of, in my case, 40 years of being called these things and not feeling good about it, that maybe I don't want to talk anymore. So this idea of self-policing. So you can go ahead to the next one, though I really like seeing that up there. So now this is a question that we asked you to consider while we were sitting together. Why do women need to speak? And more importantly, why do you need to speak? So what were some of the things that we said in the group? So I know that you had a really good answer, so I'm going to start with you. So why is it important that we think about speaking? So again, this idea of like a gift, right? That what you have inside is a gift. It is something to offer. It is something to give. That matters to give that, yeah. So to give you an example of that, I had several miscarriages and went through fertility and I just kept looking for somebody to be talking about it, and it was so in the shadows. Like everybody would whisper it or not talk about it. And so I really made it my mission to write stories and publish and talk and tell and I can't tell you how many people pull me aside and be like, thank you so much for doing that. This happened to me. Because if we keep things in shadows, then everybody thinks they're alone in the shadows. And if we talk about it, then we realize like, oh, we've all been here. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I think shame is a big part of that too, right? So this idea of I love Marianne Williamson, like this idea of shining light so that others can shine. I think that's what voice is. That's why my last question is, how do we encourage other women to speak as well, not just ourselves? Because I think there is a responsibility to do that. So the next, I wanted to really think about what are some things that might get in our way so that we can be aware of them. And I picked things that I find to be particularly gendered. And I think that everyone can be silenced. I think marginalized voices are often silenced. But for tonight, I really wanted to focus on what I see to be gendered obstacles to speaking our mind. So the first one is mansplaining. So this is a funny magazine cover. It says, "Mansplain, the magazine for women written by men. Confused by politics, find out what to think. Everything you know is wrong, but don't worry your pretty little head about it." So it's basically to comment on or explain something to a woman in a condescending, overconfident, and often inaccurate or oversimplified manner. Actually, what you really should do is, I see a nod, anything that starts with actually usually means you're about to be. Academia is famous for this. Is this something that people, you don't need to share, you don't have to, can you nod? Have you had these experiences? But your gasp of shock, why are you surprised? Because all of you have had one of those experiences, at least one, where you've been really, maybe not violently taught to be quiet, but these like passive moments of like aggression, these microaggressions are what are called now. These obstacles, these kind of mansplaining, like, well, I know how the world works. And again, I am married to a man. This is not me bashing men. This is me doing is talking about in settings where men still dominate, academia, business, sometimes household, financially, that in these situations, the opportunity for that moment where somebody says, well, actually, and reminds you of where you are in the decision-making process. So here's, I think, another obstacle that is particularly relevant to women. And it comes from this book. I don't know if anybody has read this. I see some waves, good. So Brene Brown writes a lot about daring greatly. And here's, being in the ring means you endure some hits. If you say something, you're putting yourself out there. You're going into the ring. So I think she articulates it really nicely. So would you start that? It's only 2 minutes.
Often the first question I get is, tell me about the title Daring Greatly. I mean, where does that come from? It sounds great, but what is it and what does it have to do with vulnerability? And for me, I'm so passionate about the title because truthfully, the whole concept and the whole idea behind Daring Greatly, I feel like really changed my life. I was in an incredibly difficult place. I was trying to show up in my work and put myself out there, and I was writing a lot and talking a lot about my research. And I felt like the more I did that, the more exposed I felt, the more afraid I felt, and the more I was constantly ducking and weaving criticism. And I came across this quote by Theodore Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and blood and sweat, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. I know that there's a myth that vulnerability is weakness, but it's not. To show up, to let ourselves be seen, to try to put ourselves out there when we're not sure if we're going to succeed, that's vulnerability, and that's daring greatly. And for me, this book is about what it takes to bust through the fear of not being enough, of not being perfect enough, of not being bulletproof enough, the fear of failing. I used to have the question that used to guide my life is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And since I wrote Daring Greatly, and since I came across this quote, my new question is, what's worth doing even if I fail? So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the book, and here's to Daring Greatly. I think we can use some more of it.
So if you need that inspiration to work through that obstacle of feeling vulnerable, because you are vulnerable, right? You said you're speaking your truth, you're putting yourself out there, you're putting your authentic self, like Lisa said, out there. That feels vulnerable, that feels scary. So I could see that is absolutely an obstacle. This book really helps you think about that and think about how to put yourself into the ring, because when you write and things, you get punched. If I give them enough time, they will see through me. I'm a phony. Imposter syndrome, and I swear the more degrees I get, the worse this gets for me. So I stand in front of you, completely bearing to you that yesterday I just was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it. I have nothing to say. I don't want my friends to be here because this will be the time they finally see through me. This will be the time. This is going to be the moment where I fall flat on my face and they finally see me for the phony that I am. So imposter syndrome, and it's gendered. More women than men report having imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome has a few pieces. So it's this collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist even in the face of information that it indicates the opposite is true. I have a PhD. I'm the director of women's studies. I have all these titles. So on paper, it seems I should feel confident in that. But I am constantly wondering, when's the time that everybody sees through me? And if this speaks to you, this really gets in the way of voice. It makes it really scary to talk if you think that at this point you might be an imposter. So there are 3 ways that this manifests itself, and I'm doing this because I want you to be aware of it. So that when it starts up again, you can be like, okay, imposter syndrome, I know what you're doing, and I'm not going to do that. So if you click to the next one, I'm not going to read through all of this, but feeling like a fake. I'm going to be frowned out. I'm going to be unmasked. I can hide behind all my fancy degrees, but really, I'm just that kid from Allentown who was carrying her book bag in the rain and had no idea what she was doing. So especially first-generation students feel like this. You can go to the next one. Success to luck. I do this all the time. I got a great job when I graduated. And I will tell anybody who listens, it's really just because I was lucky. I do it all the time because I can't possibly believe that there's some legitimacy to the way that I speak my truth. And the last way is discounting success. Oh, it's not a big deal. It wasn't important. I do that all the time. I found out today that I got promoted, right? So I found out today, no, don't clap. Because in my mind, I'm like, but right? It's not that big of a deal, right? It's a totally big deal. But I get that letter, I'm like, oh, this is just, it's not that big of a deal. So imposter syndrome is really insidious because we do it to ourselves. And then we don't talk because we do it to ourselves. There's nobody outside of me saying, Colleen, you should be quiet. But there are plenty of little voices that I go to yoga to try to shut them up, but in my head. And I think this speaks to a lot of you probably really successful. I swear to God, the more successful I get, the louder this imposter syndrome voice sounds. The louder it gets. So just be aware of it. The next time you see yourself maybe discounting a success, saying it's luck, saying it's a fluke, saying, oh, I don't want to do this. They're going to finally find out that I'm no good. That's what that narrative is, that you've been taught, right? You've been taught that narrative. So how do we undo all this? So here's that last question. How do we make ourselves heard, and how do we encourage other women to speak out? So all of these are just different ideas to get you to maybe try, to think about. And the first one is journaling. No one else needs to hear you. No one else needs to hear what you have to say for a really long time. No one else ever needs to hear what you have to say. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, I have nothing to say, I have nothing to offer, I bet if you sat down with an empty page tomorrow morning with your coffee, you'd probably be able to fill it with something that's going on with you, something that you want to say. I thought of these things all as like training. How do we train our voices to come back? Kind of come back from the dead, come back from that place where they've been squelched. And I really believe, right, and that's why I put this image, I am writing for an audience of one. That's it. If you hear yourself, sometimes that's 75% of the battle, that authentic self that's coming through. So what else can we do? We can kindly and assertively use social media as an opportunity for conversation. I chose my words well, right? I think social media is a really powerful force if we use it kindly and assertively, not aggressively and meanly, which is why I have Don't Feed the Troll. That's another talk that we could have, that women are much more, get way more negative comments. Did anybody see that wonderful video a few weeks ago of the two sports writers that the men came and read? Yeah, I'm seeing a few nods. Just Google female sports writers, men read comments, and men read the comments that the female sports writers got. And they're like, you should be raped, you should be killed, yeah. And this is called trolling. This is what I mean when I say, when you go out into the ring, you have to dare greatly, because you are going to get not nice things said to you. But you have to know that it's okay to be out there. So I really believe in social media as an opportunity to be kind and assertive, not mean. I get mansplained too all the time on social media. I love it. I'm like, mansplaining. So this is something you could do. Maybe get a Twitter account and just see what that does. You only have to do 140 characters, so that's an easy thing to do. So the next thing you can do is write a letter to the editor. Yay! So I have this lovely screenshot of a letter to the editor that I just wrote about Vera Cole, who's here tonight, who's running. Yay! But I still believe in the good old-fashioned letter to the editor. I really do believe that when we write to people in our community, that is our audience. When I teach my students at Kutztown, the last assignment they do is a letter to the editor, and I make them send it, and it's wonderful when they hear their voice get heard. And you know, I care about things. You care about things. You all care about things. Even if they're the opposite things that I care about, I want you to write these letters because they're short, they're easy, you don't get beat up, usually, so that's good. And so I really encourage you to think about maybe having your voice heard in that arena. Another thing you can do is if you really want to dip your toes out there, you could start blogging. I always say, if we had known that the word blogging was going to stick in 2001, we would have come up with a much better word. Because it sounds like you're vomiting every time you say it. It just means web blog. So blogging is cheap, free, kind of easy, maybe even fun, and you can decide how much you want to publicize it. So maybe you have some things to say and you want to say them just to your family or just to your peers. And I say visit me anytime. You can click on that link and it should take us to my website, but it might not because it's grumpy tonight. Yeah. Well, what would it do if we click there? Ignore it. Okay. So that's my blog. Oh, there it is. PCs. So this is my blog that I started years ago. I had no idea what I was starting, what I was doing. And at some point, it became something. And when I have something to say, I put stuff up there. And I, probably have like 100 followers. I'm not making money or doing anything. But sometimes I have something to say, and I want to say it, and I want people to hear it. And thank you. And I think it's important to eventually find some focus. But yeah, so that's my blog. Please come visit me anytime. And then if we go to our next slide. And this is a great way to have your voice heard because no one else needs to hear it. I know that everybody's yammering about who they're going to vote for, but when you go in that little booth and you're all by yourself, you can say whatever you want. And it's easy to forget what everybody did so that we could go in that little booth all by ourselves and do whatever we want. But I really believe that this is a way to have our voices heard. And again, I want you to vote for Vera because she's amazing, but I really don't care who you vote for. I really want all women to go into a voting booth and press a button is really what I want. Because I don't want any woman to think that what she has to say doesn't matter. Because talk about a thing that matters is voting. Ooh, hello. And then I think we have one more thing. And then if you're stuck for ideas, sing, dance, go on a roller coaster and scream. You have to train your voice. You have to train your mouth to open and say things and do things. Come to yoga and chant. Sing in the shower. Go to Dorney Park. I don't care. But if you don't train your voice to work, it is never going to work. So I encourage you to do that. And then, I think, right? Train your mind and your mouth to open wide whenever you can, and your voice will follow. And I do believe that. I really do believe that. So I think with that, I will say thank you. And thanks for your time. And thanks for being here.